All right, today's lecture is on population ecology. There will be a little bit of review about ecology in general and populations in general, and then we'll start focusing on human population. General information. There are two inputs, two things that make your population bigger. Having babies, so your birth rate, and immigration, people moving in, so immigration with an I. The outputs, the things that make your population smaller, are when you die or death rate, or immigration with an E, people leaving your country. Population size, which in our mathematical calculations is big N. Population size is the total number of individuals living in a given area, all of the same species. So when we talk about the population of the United States, it's how many individuals are living within the border of the United States at a given time. Realize there are population lags as far as getting the data out there. So when you guys are researching your different countries, you're not getting the data from 2018, right? You're getting the data from the last time there was a census. How often do they do censuses in the United States? 10 years. Every 10 years. We're coming up on one. When we do the census, is it an accurate count of every single person in the United States? Who's generally missing from that count? So our undocumented immigrants. They tend not to participate. And in fact, there have been legal battles on whether or not they're legally allowed to participate. But in general, they don't fill out the census form. Are you required by law to fill out the census form? No, you can take that census form and throw it in the trash instead of filling it out and mailing it back in. What's the big incentive in the United States other than like putting our population on a website? What's the draw to doing a census form? What does it help decide? Yeah, so your representatives in government. Depending on how many people are in your area, like your little district, or in your state, will determine what your representation is in the government arena in Washington in making laws. And that's where that battle between undocumented citizens comes in, right? Because if we include all of our undocumented citizens, California's population would swell a little bit if we counted everyone. We tend not to. We also tend not to count the homeless because they don't have a physical address, and so they tend not to be included in the census. So it's a pretty good representation of our population, but it's not 100% accurate. Kind of like when we do population counts of wild animals. We're never 100% sure that we've got every single individual. Population density is the number of individuals divided by the area that we are including in our population. What is the most dense city that you can think of? New York. What else? San Francisco, pretty much. How about Beijing? So some of the big Asian countries. I wouldn't necessarily include Los Angeles up there. Why? Not necessarily tourists. Do we have a small footprint for LA? No, LA spread out, and so our density is probably lower as far as major cities, as opposed to New York, which went up and like compacted people into a really small footprint. So density you can calculate mathematically. You guys are going to be required to do math. And there's a lot of math in this section. The good news is y'all get calculators this year. Last year they had to do it by hand. One of the things that you might have to calculate is this density. So for example, if you have 180 tree frogs in 9 kilometers, you have 20 tree frogs per kilometer. It's useful for setting hunting limits. So my density is going to allow me to figure out how many hunting permits for my tree frogs I can put out there. More importantly though, with high density comes disease. With high density comes high resource use. With high density comes high demand for kind of territory, living space, all of that stuff. Because of that, the higher the density, the more management I need to do. That's also going to make us do decisions. When we think about like the density of the Mission Viejo High School campus versus the density of like Laguna Hills campus versus Tribuco, You know, every year we shift teachers around. And we shift them from the low density high schools to the high density high schools. We lose teachers every year to El Toro because El Toro is building right now because they've got some newer homes. Mission Viejo and Laguna are shrinking. And have y'all heard the rumors of what might happen in the next couple of years? That we may combine the two campuses. It's a rumor. It goes around every couple of years, but it's making sense because we're at about 2,100. Laguna's sitting at about 1,300. When I first started working here in 2000, this campus was at 3,200. Right? And so could we put all of Laguna on this campus? 100%. There are people at the district office that are starting to play this game of resource to population density. Does it make sense to run two different high schools within a mile of each other that are shrinking? Because think about all of the resources. You guys are doing this electrical competition right now. Just the electricity of having these buildings occupied is huge. And if we could bring them over here and increase our density, it would be a better use of our resources possible. So we're going to use this population density to make decisions like that. Population sex ratio is looking at the number of males to females. In an ideal situation, it would be 50-50. So 1 male to every female, because that's how you get families. That's how you get babies. That's how you get replacement fertility. Now, if I had to choose, if it can't be 50-50, would I rather have more males or more females? More females, right? Because it only takes 1 male to fertilize a lot of flowers, but you gotta have the flowers. And so we would rather, if we're gonna have a stable or growing population, have more females than males, but ideally it would be 1-to-1. Population age structures are going to allow us to predict what we're going to see with the population size in the future. So if you look and we go A, B, C, which population is growing? Population A, population B, or population C? A. Why? Yeah, because there's more people below 30 years of age. Well, they are coming into the time when they're going to start having kids. And there's a lot of them, so there's going to be a lot of kids, and so that population is going to grow. Which population is staying the same? A, B, or C? C, right? Because the number of kids is the same as the number of adults, it's the same as the number of old people. So when you look at these age population structure graphs, it's going to tell us or allow us to predict what's going to happen as far as population size in the future. In addition, it is going to allow me to predict what I need for my resources in the future. If I look at B, that band of blue, that big band, is between the ages of 45 and 64. They are at the tail end of their working lifespan. So what are they going to start doing? Retiring, and in this country, when you retire, you draw on Social Security. So you have your own independent money or pension that you set aside, but most people, not teachers because we don't pay into it, but most people are going to start drawing on Social Security, which is the government retirement plan. So every paycheck you pay into Social Security, when you retire, you get a living wage back from Social Security. There's more people that are going to start pulling from Social Security than are going to be paying into it. This is where that fear comes from in the United States, that we're going to run out of Social Security money. This is kind of a true age structure pyramid for the United States because we've got the baby boomers that are all of the people that were born after World War II that have retired or are nearing retirement age. They're going to start pulling on Social Security. Whether or not we're going to have enough is questionable because we don't have as many people paying in that are going to be pulling out. In addition, this aging population, this blue bubble on B, they're going to start needing more health care. So we're going to need more doctors, We're going to need more money in our healthcare system to fight diseases. And diseases, as you get older, get more expensive. So now we start talking about cancers, and we start talking about pneumonia, which requires hospitalization. So we're going to need more financial support in that area. We can predict what we're going to need 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and we can start setting aside resources for that. If you look at A, where the big band is below 25, we're going to need jobs for all those people. We need teachers for all of those kids. We need schools for all of those kids. It's allowing us to look at the age structure and predict the infrastructure that we're going to need to build to support the people that are aging up through these bubbles. Organisms will grow and reproduce if you have enough resources. So if there is enough food, if there's enough money, if there's enough houses, you're going to reproduce. Most people are not going to choose to have children until someone is established in a career, until you have a reliable place to live, until you can put food on your table. Then you will choose to have a child. Now, are there a lot of children that are born in not ideal times? Yeah, but it's not a conscious choice usually. When we're talking about conscious choice to have kids, you're going to wait until you're stable. Limiting resources we've talked about before. What are the 3 things that humans need to survive? Food, water, shelter. What's your limiting resource? Water, because it's the thing that will kill you first. Density dependent and density independent we have talked about before as well. Density dependent. How much that resource is contested, how much it impacts your survival depends on how big your population is. So if I were to bring a dozen donuts this morning and there were 6 of you in the classroom, y'all would be happy. If I bring a dozen donuts and now there's 29 of you in the classroom, is someone going to lose out? Yeah, that's density dependent. Density independent tends to be things like natural disasters. It will kill you no matter how big your population is. Again, I said there was going to be math, and let me just talk for a second about theory of knowledge. When we do math in science, there are oftentimes constants. And it is hard to decide why that constant is there. Really, why Avogadro's number? Why pi? Because it made the math work. And so when we look at some of these equations going forward, y divide by 10, it made the math work. And that's one of the things I don't like about math, especially math and science, is you get to go, well, it didn't work normal, but if I do the inverse, my math works. And so it must be, the equation must be inverse. Maybe your math just wasn't right. But here's the deal. Theory of knowledge. Someone somewhere said, if I do this, it makes the math work. Here, now memorize the formula. So don't ask why, just memorize the formula. All right. Growth rate is the number of offspring an individual can produce in a given lifespan minus the death of the individual or their offspring. In simple terms, this is how many babies I can pop out that are going to make it to reproductive age, -1. Why -1? Because I'm going to die. The more kids I pop out, the more likely I am to die, because kids are hard. But your growth rate is how many kids that you have that make it to reproductive rate -1, minus you. Intrinsic growth rate is under ideal conditions with unlimited resources, how many offspring can you have? So a woman becomes fertile at about 13, 14 years of age, and she can have a baby every 9 months. Stops being fertile around 55. Under ideal conditions. That's a lot of kids, right? No one does that, but that's the possibility. Think back to those growth curves that you drew, exponential and logistic. An exponential growth curve looks like what? What letter? A J. Logistic growth curve looks like what letter? An S. That top of the S, what do we call that? The carrying capacity. So that's the number of individuals that the population can hold based on the number of resources available. A metapopulation is a group of spatially distinct populations that are connected by occasional movements of individuals between them. Let me give you an example. You all are Mission Viejo High School students, and you are proud of being a Diablo. You probably have, or your parents have, a mission sticker on their car. You are a spatially distinct population. A mile up the road are Laguna Hills people. They're Hawks. They're proud of being Hawks. Their parents probably have stickers on their car. Now, we are metapopulations. We are small, distinct populations. Is there occasional movement between the two populations? I know there's a couple of guys that last year were on my husband's soccer team here who have moved to Laguna Hills because they weren't going to make varsity here. Spatial movement between the two. What happens if you get expelled from Mission? You go to another high school in our district. And people who get expelled from Laguna come here, and people who get expelled from here go to Laguna. We call that, in very not nice terms, pass the trash. All right? We're just shifting people around. We are spatially distinct. We have our own branding, but there can be movement between the two populations. Every once in a while, the dating pool here at Mission gets a little stale. So you gotta go and cherry pick over at Laguna, right? Or Trabuco. That's gonna, change. Know that birth rate and death rate are both falling. In the beginning, we were hunters and gatherers, and we impacted the environment no more than a bear. So we were going around killing just like any other wild animal, and we were constantly on the move. Then we figured out it was easier to grow our own crops and to settle down and keep our livestock in a pen, and we started influencing the environment because now we're using all of the resources in a very small little area. Not great. Industrial Revolution made it so that I didn't have to grow my own food. I didn't have to sew my own clothes. It was being done in factories. Life became a little bit easier. And then in modern times, medical care became easier to access, and people were surviving things that used to kill us. Demography is the job that you would get if you wanted to study populations. If you wanted to look at how populations are growing, how we're utilizing our resources, what we can do to make things better, you would be a demographer. We know that if input is greater than output, if we have more babies being born, more people moving into our country, then we have dying or leaving, our population's going to grow, and vice versa. We know that biotic potential is the maximum reproductive ability under ideal conditions. How many children can I have if I've got everything I need and I've got great health care? How many can I pop out? We know that the crude birth rate and crude death rate are based on reality. Crude birth rate, number of children born in a country or in a population per 1,000 individuals per year. So for every 1,000 individuals, how many babies are born each year? Crude death rate is number of deaths per 1,000 individuals per year. Global population growth is crude birth rate minus crude death rate divided by 10. Again, here's this like, why 10? Don't ask why, just go with it. It made the math work. In 2009, there were 20 births per 8 deaths. What was your global population growth rate? (20 births per 8 deaths. So your crude birth rate was 20 per 1,000. Your crude death rate was 8 per 1,000. What was your growth rate? You gotta divide by 10. 1.2. So 20 minus 8 is 12, divided by 10 gives you 1.2. National population growth is now how many babies are born plus how many people are moving into your area minus how many people are dying and how many people are leaving divided by 10. So you have to include immigration and immigration. Here's the one that I see on the exams the most often, and that's your doubling time. Doubling time is how long is it going to take for your population to double in size. Doubling time is 70 divided by your growth rate. So in the previous example, my growth rate was 1.2. So 70 divided by 1.2, my doubling is 58. So it'll be 58 years before my population doubles. The reality is in the United States, our growth rate is 0.6, which means it takes 117 years right now for the population of the United States to double. Compared to Nicaragua, which is 2.7, it's taking them 26 years to double their population. Which one's growing, the US or Nicaragua? Nicaragua's growing faster. We're both growing, but Nicaragua's growing substantially faster. Natural increase rate is a bizarre one, but it's crude birth rate minus crude death rate divided by the mid-year population times 1,000. Just memorize it, guys. I've never seen you have to use that formula. I don't know why it's mid-year population and not the end of the year or the beginning of the year. Just memorize it. The big one here is this 70. I guarantee that will pop up on a test. They call it the rule of 70, by the way. Total fertility rate is an estimate of the number of children each woman will have in her lifetime. It's not my biotic potential, it's my reality. In the US in 2017, the total fertility rate was 1.76. No one is having 0.76 of a child, right? It's an average, because there are people like me that have 3, then there's like Mrs. Miller who has 2, then there's like Miss Kozik who has 0. So it's the average. Replacement level fertility is the total fertility rate required to offset the death of the parents. In a perfect world, total replacement fertility is 2, right? Because I die, my husband dies, but I got 2 kids, they replace me. In the US, the rate required to keep our population at 0 growth was 2.1. Because, you know, there are a lot of old people that are croaking right now. So us young people got to make up for it a little bit and have 2.1 children on average to keep our population at 0. But the reality is we're 1.76. So is the US population going to go up, go down, or stay the same? Go down, right? And it's going down because our fertility rate is 1.76, but to keep us at 0, we need 2.1. So our fertility rate is lower than what's needed to replace the current population. So the United States population is decreasing. Make sense? In developed countries, replacement level fertility is typically 2.1. By the way, again, with the political correctness, developing countries is now branded as more economically developed countries. Because developed and developing are microaggressions. So we are more economically developed. We got more money, essentially. In developing countries, less economically developed countries, replacement level fertility is typically above 2.1. And that's for a couple of factors. The big one here is healthcare. The reality is, in some of these countries, healthcare is still lagging, and so we still see a high child mortality rate, which means I have a kid and he gets sick, and I only have my feet to get me to the clinic that is 2 hours away. It's hard to get healthcare at that point. We know that in these countries that have high childhood mortality, income is typically less than $3 a day. Again, not quite bicycle rate from our video. And the women are often uneducated, and we see a big link between the education of a woman and the childhood mortality rates. I like this map. I threw it in. Is just the countries scaled by population size. It's kind of cool. Life expectancy is another thing that we need to take into consideration. In the United States, as of last year, males live to approximately 80 and females to 84. Women, we always live longer. Always. In India, males are living to 66 and females are living to 69. What is the difference between the United States and India? Healthcare is the big one. Access to adequate nutrition is up there. Working conditions are huge as well. This is a good indicator of our resource use. The longer you live, the more resources you are going to use. Plain and simple. Map of life expectancy. The red is 75 plus. The green is 65 plus. And then the purple is kind of below 45, 50. Why do we see such a low life expectancy in sub-Saharan Africa? What disease?
Ebola.
Not Ebola, not West Nile. HIV. There are still very high rates of HIV in sub-Saharan Africa, which lowers the average life expectancy. Infant and child mortality rates, again, access to healthcare is a huge one here. Nutrition, potable water, having clean water is huge in getting your children to survive. It's the number of deaths under the age of 1 per 1,000 live births if you're talking about infant mortality. Childhood mortality is the number of deaths under the age of 5 per 1,000 live births. Here's a little scary thing that we are still researching. We don't know why, but in the US, our infant mortality is sitting at about 5.82. Compare that to another more economically developed country, Sweden, which is 2.2. We are relatively high for a developed nation, and we don't know why. So healthcare is looking into this, demographers are looking into this. We're trying to figure out why we have such high infant and child mortality. Our childhood mortality is 6.5 compared to Sweden at 2.7. We have equal access to healthcare, so it's not a healthcare issue. It is a possible career choice for you, though. Could you solve this problem? Aging and growth is dependent on standard of living. So what does your work history look like, your work conditions? What was your nutrition or is your nutrition? What is your access to health care? Disease is a huge killer as you get older. And it is the second largest killer after heart disease. The two biggies are HIV, which we're seeing in sub-Saharan Africa, and TB, tuberculosis. We now have a lot of drug-resistant tuberculosis out there, which means the drugs that we used to be able to give you to cure it are no longer effective. And so we see high death rates due to that. Already touched on an age structure pyramid. So it tells us whether or not the population is growing rapidly, slowly, or not at all. It also allows us to predict our needs, our resources for the future. Rapid growth, we have a huge base and it narrows as we go up. Slow growth, you still have your base a little bit wider than the top of the pyramid, but not by much. Zero growth, it is equal almost all the way up. This is equal replacement level fertility. So for every person that dies, someone is born. And then negative growth, it's narrower at the bottom. Germany, Bulgaria, and Hungary are looking at negative growth here. In Russia, they went through a phase where they were actually paying people to have children because they were at negative growth. And so there were incentives and bonuses if you were able to have a kid. Migration, a country with a low birth rate can still grow because you can have people moving into that country. U.S. is expected to grow 44% by 2050, and it has nothing to do with our birth rate. It has to do with people coming to this country for the resources that this country holds, the opportunities. U.S. gains about 1 million people per year. With the current population rate of 300 million, we're looking at 3.8 people per 1,000 are migrating into this country. Canada's a little bit higher, 5.6, because, Canada's just better. Movement of people around the world affects our ecological footprint. Where are the resources needed? It affects our health issues. We're bringing disease. So when I talked to Ivy Bio earlier this month, we talked about this idea of herd immunity with vaccinations and how in South Orange County people have kind of stopped vaccinating their children a little bit, and we're seeing outbreaks of measles, which is a disease that is not common in the United States. But the idea of immigration, of people coming into our country from countries where measles is common, or tourism coming in carrying that disease. TB is not very common in the United States. All of your teachers are screened for TB every 2 years. Why? We are exposed to newcomers. And there is countries that are high with TB. And so we have to be screened because of our exposure. And then this last one is humanitarian issues. We have to find a way for everyone to live in peace and harmony and everyone to get the resources they need. This becomes an issue in countries that you see a lot of refugees from war-torn countries. And so if you think about Europe, if you think about Spain and Italy, some of these countries that are accepting a lot of refugees, Germany, there have been protests and there's been discord, and humanitarian groups have had to come in and kind of make peace as we settle people into new countries. That's where we're going to end for the day, just so that we keep on an even keel with first period. So you may use the rest of the period to work on your population debates, to work on your energy campaign, or anything else you need.